Saudi Arabia bet big on Chinese laser weapons. Big problem for them because they just wasted their money. The systems aren't working like they're supposed to. This also raises some serious questions about China. Are their military systems truly paper tigers? And will China be able to sell its military hardware abroad after this massive failure? First of all, we have to take a closer look at the Chinese military equipment Saudi Arabia bought, the so-called Sky Shield anti-drone system. It combines radars, optical sensors, and electronic signal jammers with laser weapons. Basically, these lasers are supposed to fry enemy drones until they fall out of the sky, using an intense beam of energy. The Sky Shield was developed by the Chinese state-owned CETS Defense Company, which has some pretty bold claims about this system. Apparently, it has a 100% interception rate during an engagement with 21 drones during a test. According to CETS, it has sold the system to about 20 countries already, not only Saudi Arabia. But why are so many countries buying it? Well, first of all, militaries desperately need anti-drone systems. Drones are the new way to fight wars now, and that's especially true for the Middle East. The Houthis, a terrorist group in Yemen, regularly uses drones to attack their enemies, including Saudi Arabia. The chief backer of the Houthis, Iran, also has a vast arsenal of drones. Iran is perhaps the biggest strategic rival of Saudi Arabia, in what's often called the Iran-Saudi Arabia proxy war. And it's not hard to understand why Saudi Arabia is so afraid of drones specifically. Saudi Arabia is an oil-producing country, which effectively means that their economy relies on just a few sites, like the Ghawar field, the largest conventional oil field in the world. When Saudi Arabia's enemies destroy the infrastructure there, it might be game over. And drones are the ideal weapons for this, because they can be used in saturation attacks. They're incredibly cheap, and you can send hundreds of them at once to wear out defenses. Back in 2019, the nightmare scenario happened when a drone attack hit the Abqaiq oil processing facility and the Khurais oil field. It temporarily downed nearly half of Saudi Arabia's oil output, about 5 million barrels a day of lost volume. The Houthis claimed responsibility, but the US and Saudi Arabia blamed Iran directly, saying that the drones came from the northeast. Ever since 2019, Saudi Arabia has been searching frantically for drone defense systems. Because if there will ever be a full-on war with Iran, Saudi Arabia can expect something far worse than 2019. Now, Saudi Arabia has historically been a loyal buyer of Western hardware, including air defense systems. It has bought American Patriot systems and THAAD systems and German IRIS-T systems. That's also because Saudi Arabia has historically been an ally of the United States, following the 1951 Agreement on Mutual Defense Assistance. But there are a couple of problems. First of all, these traditional military systems are very expensive. Their air defense missiles cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars apiece. Because drones are so much cheaper and more expendable, Saudi Arabia needs new kinds of systems. And Western countries don't sell these things at the moment, for good reasons that we'll go into later. But there is also the geopolitical changes pushing Saudi Arabia closer to China. Saudi Arabia doesn't want to be solely an ally to the US anymore. The biggest factor of all has to do with oil. China is the second biggest oil consumer globally. And because it doesn't have large oil reserves at home, it's the world's #1 oil importer by far. For Saudi Arabia, the world's largest oil exporter, this makes China a very attractive and logical partner. That's also why Saudi Arabia wants to work together with China on defense and buy Chinese weapon systems. It would only strengthen the ties between the two countries and make Saudi Arabia less reliant on America. All in all, that's why Saudi Arabia bought the Chinese Sky Shield, and it looked very promising. Theoretically, it is a very low-cost and precise way to shoot down drones. After all, you're only using energy, and no actual rocket or missile is lost. Now, laser weapons have been produced for decades, but there's a reason why they're not widely adopted yet. The physics and the engineering of laser weapons is incredibly challenging. You have to have an incredible power supply, and you need to be able to lock the laser beam precisely on a moving target. And if you want to shoot a laser beam for more than a few seconds, you need an advanced cooling system to make sure the weapon itself doesn't overheat and break down. Also, simple weather conditions like clouds, rain, or dust drastically reduces the weapon's effectiveness. And you can't have defenses that don't work on a cloudy day. But the Chinese claimed that they have solved these problems, and that their laser systems were the perfect match for Saudi Arabia's drone problem. With an apparent 100% sure interception rate, it was an offer Saudi Arabia couldn't refuse. However, looks can be deceiving. The Chinese laser weapons were not nearly as great, surprise, surprise. According to a former Saudi military officer speaking to Defense Blog, despite the strong performance demonstrated during trials, in real conditions, the Sky Shield components have lower effectiveness than promised. He also said that, in some cases, it took between 15 and 30 minutes of continuous targeting and laser illumination to guarantee a drone kill. Now, you don't have that much time in real combat. Some of these drones can fly faster than 100 miles per hour, and you can have dozens of them coming at you at once. But the reasons behind the failure of the Sky Shield are hardly surprising. The extreme heat in the Saudi Arabian desert meant that the cooling system took too much energy, making the laser beam itself weaker. The dust and the sand disrupts the tracking system and also helped to weaken the laser beam. Meanwhile, the systems weren't ideal for fast deployment, and it took way too much time to set them up. These are exactly the reasons why other countries haven't tried to sell their laser systems quite yet. It's not like they're not working on them. Over in America, the US Army has the DEM SHORAD system, and the US Navy has the Helios system. In Israel, they have the Iron Beam system as part of the Iron Dome defenses. Other countries like Germany, the United Kingdom, France, Japan, and even South Korea are also developing laser weapon technology. But all these systems are not yet perfected. They're either in the prototype phase or they've just been deployed. There's no way that these countries could guarantee the effectiveness of their laser weapons to foreign buyers. But why did China sell its laser systems, even though they weren't good enough yet? Well, first of all, China likes to overstate how technologically advanced it really is. CCP propaganda portrays the Chinese defense industry as a clear rival to the US, with groundbreaking technological breakthroughs. It's not just doing this with laser weapons, but also hypersonic weapons or fighter jets. Some of these breakthroughs may actually be happening, but they can also be overstated. And in turn, this can make China overconfident in its capabilities. This also ties into how the Chinese defense industry is organized. Defense companies are state-owned, including the CETS Corporation, which developed the Sky Shield laser system. When these companies have to report to the big boss in Beijing, it's not smart to talk about all the difficulties they face or the fact that they might not hit the CCP's ambitious goals. Good news only reporting is the best strategy, especially for employees who want to keep their jobs. So when the CCP asks whether the laser systems are ready to be deployed and sold, the easy answer is always yes. And when you look at the tests they did, you could argue that the Sky Shield was ready with a 100% effectiveness rate, but conditions during real operations are always different from test conditions. That's why you could never confidently claim military equipment works based on a single test. Ideally, military equipment has proven its worth in real combat situations time and time again before it's being sold abroad. But then we arrive at a second problem for the Chinese defense industry. In general, China has a severe lack of combat experience. The People's Liberation Army, the PLA, has not fought a war since the 1979 Sino-Vietnamese War. And back in 1979, the PLA was not as advanced yet. That means that most of the military equipment China has made ever since then has never been tested on the battlefield. It's a huge difference with the United States, which has fought many wars. After the Cold War, America has entered into combat in Panama, Iraq, Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, Libya, and Syria, just to name a few. This allows the US to test new weapons and streamline combat operations. The recent war in Ukraine also provided a testing ground to see how American weapons match up against Russian ones. China has none of this, except one case in the Pakistan and India conflict that we'll talk about later. It means that for most Chinese weapons, their actual effectiveness is theoretical. Still, even though their weapons only work on paper, China has to sell them abroad. That's because there's also a business side of this. China desperately wants to increase its arms exports for a simple reason. Between 2020 and 2024, the United States had a massive market share of 43% of all weapons sold internationally. France was second at 9.6%, and Russia was third at 7.8%. China clearly lags behind, capturing only 5.9% of the market. Despite being a global manufacturing hub and having the world's second biggest economy. It's something that Beijing wants to change. From an economic standpoint, China wants to have more export revenue, and arms sales, well, that's a great way to achieve that. They're also necessary to boost China's defense industry, to finally become competitive with the United States. Exports lead to more orders for your own domestic defense companies, which creates an economy of scale and leads to faster growth and innovation. Meanwhile, China also wants arms exports as a way to get influence abroad. That's because arms sales create dependencies for the buyers and leverage for the seller. America is the biggest example of this. Many countries listen to what America has to say because they need the weapons. China clearly wants to copy this model, and selling laser weapons was an important component of this. Because laser weapons are so new, China actually has a chance to get ahead of Western defense companies if it's fast. But China is trying to sell many more categories of weapons abroad. China sells main battle tanks to Thailand, Nigeria, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. It sells submarines to Pakistan, Thailand, and Bangladesh, and military drones to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iraq, and others. And that's just the bottom of the barrel, because China's arms sales have reached countries all over the world. Their sales pitch is simple. They undercut Western prices, and their customers don't have to be friends with the United States or Europe anymore. One of these Chinese arms sales was actually successful in combat. Chinese J-10C fighter jets and missiles sold to Pakistan were able to shoot down Indian fighter jets. According to Pakistan, it downed 3 French Rafale fighters, a Russian MiG-29, and an Su-30. This was disputed, but an anonymous French intelligence source told CNN that they could confirm at least one Rafale being downed. That was very good news for China, because it would mean that Chinese fighter jets actually matched up to Western ones. After hearing the news, Indonesia started seriously considering buying J-10 fighter jets, and Iran is also thinking about buying them. It goes to show how important a reputation really is in arms sales. But that's the same reason why the failure of the Sky Shield in Saudi Arabia is such a big deal. When a big buyer like Saudi Arabia loses its trust in China, Chinese arms sales could take a big hit in the future. Also, this laser weapon problem wasn't an isolated incident. Nigeria, Myanmar, Bangladesh, and Pakistan have all experienced problems with defective Chinese military equipment, including various types of aircraft, frigates, and missiles. If China doesn't improve its reputation, it will be tough to go from 5.9% of the international arms sales market to a competitive 20 or 30%. These examples show Saudi Arabia and others that it's not worth betting your money on Chinese weapons, just because China claims the product is good. Instead, they need rock-solid evidence in real combat situations before even considering it. Or they will turn to American defense contractors like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, or Raytheon, which have built up a global reputation. The implications of the incident go further than this, though. The failure of high-tech military systems also shows that the PLA itself might not be as advanced as the CCP claims. The overassessment of military equipment might not be an isolated problem, but rather a symptom of the Chinese defense industry in general. And this could become a serious problem when China ever decides to use its military. Some defense experts believe it's going to invade Taiwan somewhere over the coming years. But China could make the same mistake as Russia did by overestimating its military capabilities. When it turns out that Chinese missiles, fighter jets, and frigates aren't as good, an invasion could result in an ugly, protracted conflict. Enough about China, though, because Saudi Arabia is also in a bit of a pickle at the moment. With the Sky Shield not working properly, they have to stick to more traditional defenses. Dedicated systems for electronic signal jamming are also on the table, because they have a solid track record. Also, the Saudis have to think about deterrence against Iran and the Houthis instead of mere defense. They need to be able to discourage them from ever launching an attack, by being able to cripple them in retaliation. Luckily for Saudi Arabia, though, they have all the money in the world. Because of government oil revenues, they can afford to spend $78 billion on defense in 2025, more than 7% of their GDP. Relative to economic size, they're spending about as much on the military as Russia, even though they're not invading one of their neighbors. They're not just using this money for arms purchases abroad, but they're also investing in their own defense industry. It would reduce the country's dependencies on foreign trade, be it in the US or China. And who knows, maybe Saudi Arabia will be able to make laser weapons on its own, better than China's.